Hi, I'm Keith with iCabinetryDirect.com.
How is white oak different from red oak beyond just color? What are the real practical and aesthetic differences?
Okay, here's an example of how white oak and red oak differ. The grain pattern in red oak, this is a red oak door, is a little more wide open. You see it's a little more varied. I call it wild. Besides just the color difference, that red oak has a pink hue to it often. It's yellow and pink typically. The grain is more wide open and it's more porous. Okay, this is a red oak door. And then this is a white oak door. The white oak, again, there is a color difference. It's more tan, brown, and has some yellow. White oaks become more popular recently. But also it has a tighter grain. The grain isn't as wild. The pattern isn't as wild. They call it cathedraling. That doesn't happen as much on the white oak. And white oak is harder than red oak. Red oak's fantastic for making cabinets, been around forever. White oak is a little harder, a little more durable, a little more moisture resistant because of the tighter grain and being less porous. So those are the differences between white and red oak.
Which situations call from white oak over red oak, vice versa?
I think it really is just about aesthetic preference. I think you look on Pinterest and House and all these sites these days, and there's a lot of white oak out there now. It's become popular again, but red oak is also a hardwood. It's great to use in kitchens. One could make an argument that it's better for bathrooms or kitchen applications, but I think it's just about budget and what your aesthetic preference is. Here's perfect examples of the differences that you can expect between white oak and red oak. This is a red oak door. So the grain is more, you see this more open grain. They call it cathedraling in the grain. I call it wild. It's more varied, right? That is the key difference between red oak and white oak. In white oak, you can see that you still have some of that cascading, but it's not as significant. And also white oak isn't as porous as red oak. So the other differences, obviously, are red oak has yellow and pink hues to it typically. White oak is also stronger than red oak. They're both hardwoods. Red oak has been used in, same as white oak, cabinetry for forever. But white oak is harder. It's more water resistant. It's what they make whiskey barrels out of, or they make boats out of white oak because it's so water resistant. So, that can matter if it's important to people for what they're going to put in their bathroom or their kitchen. Other than that, it's really about what's the grain look like and what's the color palette look like. That's how people decide on what they want. White oak's super popular these days. This is an example of Flatsawn white oak. We're going to talk about the different ways that they cut a log and prepare the lumber to make the cabinetry. Flatsawn is one of the most common. It's also the most economical. They take the log and they simply cut, even pieces one at a time through the log. And it's why you'll see more grain in a Flatsawn application because of the way the rings are.
Are all oak cabinets made from Quartersawn oak, or is that a misconception? Help us understand what's actually standard.
All white oak cabinets, or red oak cabinets for that matter, are not Quartersawn. There's really 3 different ways you can get the wood cut for oak, be it white oak or red oak cabinetry. And that's Flatsawn, or plain sawn they call it. That's the standard. It's the least expensive way to process, and it's probably the most common. And then there's Quartersawn oak. There's more labor involved in cutting the wood that way. They quarter the log and then cut each of those quarter sections. It makes the final product a little stronger, actually, and also it opens up a lot of flecking. I have a sample here I'll show you of what flecking is on a Quartersawn oak door, and you can see all this flecking here that pops out in Quartersawn oak because of the way they cut it. And also the grain is even more tight than in standard Flatsawn. So that's two of the three ways you can cut an oak log. The other is Riftsawn oak. So the third way that you can cut the log is Riftsawn. Also it's the most labor intensive, actually. Even more so than Quartersawn oak. You quarter the log still, but then they cut the log in a way so that the grain is really straight. And you can see that, and this is a great example of what Riftsawn looks like. And there's even more prep than in Quartersawn, so it's the most expensive way typically to prepare lumber, and ultimately that gets passed on in the price of the cabinetry. So there's three different ways you can prepare oak cabinetry: Flatsawn or plain sawn, Quartersawn, and Riftsawn.
If someone wants the best Quartersawn white oak cabinets, where should they be looking? What separates premium suppliers from average ones?
Okay, so if somebody wants a really good quality Quartersawn oak, be it white oak or red oak, they need to look at, first of all, a cabinetry company that supplies Quartersawn oak. And again, as we talked about, that's a more expensive way to prepare the lumber to use in the cabinetry, and it gives a different look. So first off, you need to find somebody that has that offers that. iCabinetry Direct offers that. And then look at the rest of how they build their cabinetry. What sort of care and processes go into building the cabinetries, from staining to, customizations, etc. Quartersawn is the next step up in labor intense. What that does, before they begin cutting the log, they quarter it. They cut it into 4 sections, and then they'll cut each section. And because of the way they do that, when you use Quartersawn oak, you get this flecking. This is a good example of what flecking looks like. Everybody should know that if they're going to get Quartersawn oak, it's going to have flecking, and you either love that or you hate it. And you should know that that is going to be part of your product if you get Quartersawn white oak. Also, you'll see, and this is a great example, the grain is tighter, but the grain itself is tighter in Quartersawn oak than it is in Flatsawn oak. You see that more of that cascading grain here, and here you don't see that. Some cabinetry companies don't offer Quartersawn. They'll only offer Flatsawn, and like we talked about, Flatsawn is a little less expensive. It's still a hardwood, still a good product, but it's not a premium product. You'll find that more often at stock level or, semi-custom cabinetry makers. And so if you want Quartersawn, usually only premium manufacturers are going to offer Quartersawn, typically. So then you got to dig into which premium manufacturer is the best. Who do you want to use for your cabinets? That's what I'd do.
What questions should buyers ask to ensure they're getting genuine Quartersawn white oak?
Well, it's going to be pretty simple to tell whether or not the product is Quartersawn. I would highly recommend they get a sample. Customers should see a sample of Quartersawn or Riftsawn oak before they buy it. 100%, because you either love it or you don't love it. And other questions I would ask is, what's the warranty? I'd read the reviews. I would compare it to other manufacturers. when you do that, I think that you'll find that Star Mark and iCabinetry Direct stack up really well against anybody. And then when you factor in the pricing that we sell it at, it makes our offering tough to beat. Everybody that orders from us, we recommend that they buy a sample of the door that they want to, if they're contemplating buying. So, like I said, if somebody was going to order a set of white oak Quartersawn cabinets from us, we would want them to buy this sample if they're looking for the thin rail shaker, so that they can see what the flecking is going to look like on the product and look at it at different angles so that they can decide if that's what they really love, because it can be significant and it can be varied from door to door. So it's important, to do that. And we provide a sample with every order. And almost everybody orders some other colored chips too for, to select the specific finish that they put on the product. But door samples highly recommended.